In tonight's episode, we travel back to the quiet streets of Edo-era Tokyo, where one man's search for love turned into a descent into darkness. This story begins with a flickering lantern, swaying gently in the summer wind. Locals say, if you ever see one glowing with peony flowers late at night, you should run, not follow. But one man didn't. He opened his door and his heart to the woman who carried it. She was beautiful, gentle, always waiting for him at dusk, and every night he let her in. But what if that kind of love doesn't come from the world of the living? What if devotion, in its purest form, can still rot? Tonight, we uncover a romance so twisted, it blurred the line between longing and death. This is the legend of the Peony Lantern. His name was Ogiwara Shinzaburō, a low-ranking samurai who lived alone in a quiet corner of Edo, long before the Tokyo skyline ever existed. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, but he was known by his neighbors as a man of discipline, who kept to himself and never asked for much. That changed one summer, during the Obon festival. Shinzaburō had recently lost his wife to illness. Since then, the days had blurred together in silence. The Obon season was meant to honor the spirits of the dead. Families lit lanterns to guide their ancestors home. But for Shinzaburō, it only reminded him of what he'd lost. His home was too quiet, his bed too cold. The only sound was the crickets outside and the soft tap of wind against the paper doors. Then one night, just after dusk, there was a knock. A woman stood at his gate. She was young, beautiful, dressed in a pale summer kimono, her face half lit by a soft lantern marked with blooming peonies. She called herself Otsuyu. Her voice was calm, her eyes full of sorrow. She said she was lost, and that she'd seen his lantern from the street. Something about her presence filled the empty space inside him, like a tide rising over a cracked shore. He invited her in. From that night on, she came to him again and again, always after dark, always holding that same glowing lantern. She never explained where she lived. She never stayed until morning. But when she was there, Shinzaburō felt alive again. The ache in his chest began to fade. He stopped visiting the temple. He stopped talking to neighbors. Nothing mattered except the soft click of the gate and the scent of her perfume when she appeared. Some called it romantic. Others weren't so sure. A merchant who passed his house late one night swore he saw Shinzaburō speaking to thin air. A neighbor claimed to hear whispering through the walls, even though no one ever left in the morning. But Shinzaburō dismissed them all. They were jealous. They didn't understand love. And neither did he. Not yet. It began with the sound of footsteps. Not hers. Those were soft, graceful, always expected. No, this was different. Heavy, shuffling. Coming from the hallway outside Shinzaburō's house long after Otsuyu had gone. At first, he assumed it was a drunk stumbling home, but the sound returned the next night, and the one after that. Always right after she left. Always moving away from his door, as if something unseen had been listening in. Then came the smell. At first, it was faint, a hint of earth, damp cloth, decay, the kind of scent that clings to old graves or unused temples. It drifted through his home in the early morning, right before dawn. Shinzaburō tried to ignore it, told himself it was the summer heat, the rotting leaves, maybe something in the wood. But the scent grew stronger each day, and always in the same place where Otsuyu had lain beside him hours before. Still, he said nothing. One afternoon, as he walked to the market, an elderly neighbor approached him. Her voice shook as she asked if he was feeling well. She said he looked pale, hollow, as if the life had been slowly drained from his body. He brushed it off with a laugh. Said he was in love. The woman didn't laugh back. Instead, she leaned in, whispered something strange. That during Obon, the boundary between the dead and living becomes thin. That some spirits don't just return to be honored. Some come back because they can't let go, and others because they refuse to be forgotten. That night, when Otsuyu returned, Shinzaburō noticed something new. Her skin looked colder, her hands colder still. When she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. And when she undressed and lay beside him, her body felt too light, too still, like a shadow mimicking a human form. But she said his name with such affection, she touched his face like it was made of glass. And in that moment, the doubts faded. The warnings disappeared. Love makes excuses. Desire buries questions. And Shinzaburō, blinded by longing, let her in again. The days passed, but Shinzaburō no longer seemed part of them. He stopped visiting the markets, stopped attending temple, stopped opening his windows to the sun. His world began and ended with dusk, when Otsuyu's lantern would glow just beyond the gate. But what once brought comfort now carried something colder. Her voice, once warm, had turned distant. Her presence, once healing, left his limbs aching in the mornings. Sometimes, he woke up, gasping, drenched in sweat, unsure if he'd even slept. And then there were the dreams. He began to see flashes, dirt-covered feet by his bedside, the faint sound of weeping echoing from under the floorboards, Otsuyu's face watching him from the corner of the room, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Each time he blinked, she was back to normal, smiling, reaching for his hand, whispering his name. One evening, a monk arrived at his gate. Old, weathered, his robes heavy with incense. He introduced himself simply as a passerby, but his eyes held the kind of knowing that made Shinzaburō uneasy. The monk didn't ask to enter. Instead, he warned him, gently, but firmly. He said the dead are drawn to loneliness, that some souls, especially those bound by love or regret, do not return during Obon, for peace, but for possession. He held out a protective charm, said nothing more, and walked away without waiting for thanks. Shinzaburō burned the charm. That same night, Otsuyu didn't come alone. As he slid open the gate, he saw her standing there as always, but this time, there was someone else behind her. A second figure, smaller, silent, wrapped in shadows. Shinzaburō blinked, and the figure was gone. When he asked about it, Otsuyu only smiled. She ran a hand down his cheek and told him not to worry, that he was hers, only hers, forever. His sleep worsened. Neighbors began to complain. Strange noises echoed through the walls at night, scraping, dragging, moaning. One man swore he saw flickering lights inside the house when no candles were lit. Another claimed to hear the sound of a second woman crying, just behind the sliding doors. Then came the final warning. A friend from his youth, one of the last who still dared to visit, barged into his home uninvited. What he saw stopped him cold. Shinzaburō, sitting perfectly still in the dark, face pale as rice paper, whispering to no one. The house reeked of mold and old flowers. He grabbed his friend's shoulders, shook him, demanded answers. But Shinzaburō only smiled. "She comes for me every night," he said. "She loves me more than the living ever did." And with that, he closed the door. It all came crashing down on the night of the full moon. The neighbor, an older man who'd once served alongside Shinzaburō's father, couldn't bear it any longer. He gathered two others, men who'd also seen glimpses through the paper windows. Pale shapes, moving shadows, whispers at impossible hours. Together, they approached the house with lanterns and prayer scrolls, determined to pull their friend back from whatever darkness had taken hold. When they slid open the front door, a wave of stench hit them. Not just decay, but something worse, something ancient, the smell of rot baked into the walls. Inside, the home was cold, unnaturally cold. No lamps were lit, no voices spoke, yet the faint rustling of silk could be heard, like someone adjusting a kimono just out of sight. They turned a corner, stepped into the sleeping quarters, and froze. Shinzaburō lay on the tatami floor, his face twisted in something between joy and agony, eyes half closed, lips curved in a soft smile, arms wrapped around the skeletal remains of a woman in tattered robes. Long black hair still clung to the skull, fingers still curled around the handle of a cracked peony lantern. One of the men screamed. Another dropped his lantern and began muttering prayers. But Shinzaburō didn't flinch. He whispered her name again and again, as if still dreaming, still believing, still lost in the lie. And then the corpse moved. Not much, just a twitch of the hand, a creak of old joints, but enough to send all three men stumbling backwards in horror. They ran, shouting to the street, calling for monks, for salt, for fire. And still, from behind the walls of that quiet home, a voice floated after them. Soft, sweet, beckoning, come back. He's not alone anymore. By morning, word had spread. The house was sealed. Priests from the nearby temple arrived with incense, talismans, and wooden charms etched with sutras. No one, not even the bravest, dared step inside again. But the monks didn't hesitate. They'd seen this before. Cases where love, grief, and spiritual weakness created an opening, a bridge between the worlds. The moment they stepped inside, they confirmed what everyone feared. Shinzaburō had been sleeping with a spirit. Not just any spirit, but one who had died long before the first knock at his door. Otsuyu's name was found in the temple records, a woman who perished from fever during Obon years earlier. Her body had been buried just outside the city, lantern still clutched in her hands. The second figure? A maid, buried with her, loyal even in death. The priests explained the truth. During Obon, some souls return to be honored, but others return because they are still clinging. Otsuyu had died with longing in her heart, and Shinzaburō, shattered by grief, had unknowingly called her to him. Their nightly meetings weren't dreams. They were rituals, repetitions of death masquerading as romance. Each embrace drained him. Each whispered promise pulled him closer to the grave. But he welcomed it, because sometimes, when love refuses to die, it doesn't just haunt, it consumes. They burned purifying incense for 7 nights, placed sacred seals across the doors, said prayers to send both spirits back to the earth. But the damage was done. Shinzaburō never woke up. They buried him at dawn. No ceremony, no visitors. Just a simple grave beside the temple, far from the house where he'd wasted away. The monks sealed the land with rope and salt, warning the townspeople never to enter again. Most obeyed. The house remained empty, windows boarded, lanterns smashed. Even the birds stopped nesting on its roof. But that summer, during Obon, strange things started happening. A child walking past the gate claimed to hear someone humming. A soft female voice, singing an old love song. Another saw light flickering through the cracks of the boarded windows, faint but unmistakably shaped like a lantern. And one night, a traveler took shelter nearby when a storm rolled in. He never knocked, never went inside. But by morning, he was found curled beside the gate, whispering the same word over and over. Otsuyu. Some say her spirit still wanders, peony lantern in hand, searching for a heart cracked open just wide enough to slip through. Others believe she never left at all. So, if you're ever in Tokyo during Obon, and you see a soft glow in the mist, if you hear someone call your name in the voice of someone long gone, do not answer. Some love stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to repeat. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video and want to listen to more true horror stories from Asia, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.